los días que la ayer ya se fue. Los humanos igual va cambiando capacidad. Hasta negar posible más de lo que imaginar. Creciendo van los humanos, descubriendo más cada potencial, descubriendo distorsiones, descubriendo más cada potencial, alcanzables son tus ideas. No lo puedes, no lo tienes que dudar. Imagínate manifestar lo que tú piensas, lo dijiste, inténtalo en el impulso. Solo tiene que ser tu persistencia, inténtalo con mucho amor y muy pronto lograrás tu capacidad. Sería posible más de lo que imaginas. Cuenta que tu magia existe adentro, no hay límite, meditarlo, solo en el corazón. Solo tienes que hacer con persistencia, inténtalo con mucho amor y muy pronto lograrás tu capacidad. Esta vida es posible más de lo que imaginas. Thank you. ellos crecen, viven, siguen, viven, siguen. Oh, 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 ah, 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 ellos continúan navegando en la vida. La tierra extranjera tiene leyes crueles, pero hay solución, sí hay solución, sí hay solución. Ellos nacen, ellos crecen, viven, siguen, viven, siguen. Oh, 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 ah, ah, ah,
So I also have to moderate this. So are there any questions?
I was interested in the comment that Shin you made about there being no romance in Japan. And I was wondering, actually, now that the other musicians are up there, during your time in Japan, did you feel a sense of romance, or did you kind of tap into something in Japan that was romantic that you didn't expect? If anybody has a comment on that.
Where's this question coming from? Over here. Oh, okay. Hi, sorry. You know, I was thinking about that. I was watching the film. I've seen it a couple times, and I just was thinking about this idea of romance and where romance comes from. And romance comes from the idea of intimacy, right? In order to have intimacy, you have to have relationships. In order to have relationships, you have to have spent time together, meaningful time together, and deep hanging out and deep listening. And I feel like each time we went twice, each time we went, Shin had curated. He understood where we were, who we were, and where we were, and he he like Eduardo from Chicano Batman called him a curator, right? A curator of culture, and he was curating an entire space, a communal space, and so the people that we got to hang out with over there were the people that we needed to hang out with at that moment, and that needed to hang out with us, and we really spent a lot of great time and created a lot of important bonds that were very meaningful and made the trip so much more than just going out and playing a concert.
What has been the impact of this, and in today's climate with such hostility to other cultures, how does this fit in?
Well, I see it as the antithesis to the hostility, right? It's all about...
How is it being received?
Well, this is actually the premiere. So, yeah, so now you can go and spread the word and tell other people about it. But yeah, it's clearly an example of how people from different worlds can come together and create something meaningful and beautiful and lasting, right? I mean, he's been doing this for 17 years now. I know a lot of us have known him for that amount of time, and that's pretty incredible. I mean, I was just thinking earlier how lucky he is that he can come to a place like Los Angeles and all these people are going to come to see him, right? He has all these friends in a totally different country. I don't have that. So he's just an amazing guy. That's why we call him the cultural ambassador.
I have a question. Somebody in the movie said that, oh, sorry. Here I am. Somebody in the movie said that before they went to Japan, they had all these misconceptions, but every time they go, they find that their misconceptions are wrong. And I wondered what they were.
Well, I probably watched too much manga beforehand. So that's probably not a good idea. But I think for the most part, I think that my perception of Japanese communities and people is like everybody else. What I realized after many years, after everybody else, were highly organized, right? Efficient, always on time. This is something I wish I was, right? But then you get there and there's a whole lot of party animals over there, okay? So I think it's just the different personalities, what people liked about our culture. I think that it was just really, it was a whole other world, something I didn't expect. And we met so many different people. And it was really wonderful to see, one of the biggest things for me was to be able to struggle with another person trying to understand each other, and they're trying to speak to me in English, and then suddenly they stop and they say, ¿Hablas español? And I say, sí. And he's, muy bien, porque mi español es mucho mejor que mi inglés, right? So they're trilingual. I mean, anyhow, it's just, I think that there were just so many things, but one of those things has been just the range of just energies and personalities and, yeah.
To add, I think it goes both ways because I know the time that I went with Quetzal, one of the places we went to like a car club where you walked in there, and at first it was kind of intimidating because you walked in there and it was like 1990s LA, Raiders jackets, Lokes, bald heads, tattoos, and then you walk in there and everybody was really nice. They bowed and gave you a kiss, really nice kiss, and so I think the exchange was kind of different. Where it's like we are a community. We're just not about lowriders. I mean, this is the mentality of some people in Japan, just like we have different mentality of, this preconceived notion of what Japan is. That's what they have about Chicanos. So the more we go there, the more we dispel some of the myths that we're all gangsters. We have lowriders going down the street, in East LA at every moment and all that sort of stuff. So and the more we go there, or any of us go there, the more people figure that out, and then these relationships start. And like Akira was saying, it's like, where Shin can go anywhere and can come here and everybody wants to see him. It's becoming like that for a lot of us that go there, that, as we go there, we have so many more friends and people that we can dialogue with. It is a beautiful thing, and it's all thanks to Shin here.
Hi, I want to actually ask, first, thank you for making the film. And thank you for sharing the culture back across the ocean. I want to ask for all of you musicians, we talk about culture shock going to another country, but what's the culture shock when you see your own culture reflected back at you to go into this environment where all these people look like Chicanos and, they're working class people and you can relate to them on that level, as somebody said in the film. And so that's my first question. The other one is, while you guys were there, did you ever see your own music reflected back to you by musicians from Japan?
Well, for the last question, yeah, it was cool because we El Haru Kuroi got to play with the Conjunto group, and that was really, as soon as they got there, I was really excited, and I asked them to just pull out their instruments and just play me a song, because I wanted to hear it, and they played really well. They know how to play the style, and it was exciting, and it was also shocking, but I loved it. I had a great time.
We could really feel the love. We could feel just love. We felt love and respect. It was really genuine. It was very moving. I think I could speak for all of us. I think we all felt that.
I think but to get to one of the nuances of your question, I really think that there was a moment where, like this idea of they'd come up and show us like a Virgen tattoo, for example, right? Virgen de Guadalupe, or the cross, or they'd say like connecting in that way, right? Of course, it's meaningful to me. But in terms of dressing like a gangster 1970s chola or a cholo, I think that that's some of the reasons that Shin would take somebody like us, for example, out there, where we don't necessarily, we understand that clothing and that style of dressing is sort of armor in the neighborhood, right? It's a way of, it is stylistic, but it's also something that has had to be cultivated because of an oppressive moment in the community, right? And this is what the youth do in order to survive. So it goes much beyond the stylistically, right? And so when Shin takes us over there and wants us to speak to everybody and talk about who we are and where we come from, and and what all the symbolism, I think he's trying to sort of get us to speak to the audience, and then also for us to dispel some of those things that somebody said earlier. But I think that for us, it was a little like, oh, this is great, but did you know that this is why the community does it? Did you know, and so we'd have those kinds of conversations, which were really great and interesting,
I just want to say something about the food. It was very impressive that the night we had our Cinco de Mayo thing happening there, I was very impressed how they had the tacos and the salsa really down. They had that, and they were really delicious. And not only the food, but even all the they had like the Frida Kahlos and like the corazon, all the stuff that's the representative that you would see like Olvera Street or one of our community like Espacio, so it was very heartwarming to see how they embraced and made it their own, and they were sharing that with us. It was reciprocal. It was very beautiful and impressive. Yeah. So I just want to say that.
Just to complicate this a little bit more, there's capitalism, right? And the way capitalism exports things, compartmentalizes things, and creates these fetishes and these cultures of fetishizing other people's culture and appropriating it. And so there was that critique for sure. But then again, when you talk about intimacy and relationships, and you start to get into, as Nacho Libre would say, the nitty-gritty of the dialogue, then you start to really uncover what Gomez was talking about, which is these, these are working class people. they're human beings, and there's a connection there that's really important.
Thank you. A number of years ago, I started learning about the mass immigration of Japanese to South America. I'm not sure if anyone went to Mexico, but Peru and Brazil. And I found out through a person I met at a conference in Okinawa, of all places. Her family moved to or Argentina. And so we kind of corresponded over the years. But later I found out there's actually more connections between Japan and some of these Latin countries. Yeah. So my question is there any connection between how Japanese seem to connect with Chicano music and the previous experiences of Japanese in like South America? It's a kind of interesting connection.
He's talking about Japanese came back to Japan.
No, the Japanese, like, is there a connection between the Japanese and South America? Is there a connection
I don't see any connections between them, but I saw many Peruvian Japanese who came back to Japan for working. They want to relate it to Chicano music, especially Chicano hip hop. And sometimes they wear like a choros, but they speak very well Spanish more than Japanese. And I talk to them very much. They say, their Chicano experience is very similar to the Japanese Peruvian came back to Japan, isolated and expression something. So that is the only things I know about it. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, and a lot of these events, and it's kind of what Martha was talking about earlier, is when Shin holds an event, there's a lot of people who not only just fans of the music, but they might have lived in Peru and Ecuador and Brazil and Mexico, and to have one of us out there, it's like being at home, and they're very happy to see us for that reason. And like you said, it's like you could have somebody struggling in English, and then once you switch to Spanish, it's like so much easier. And then they're like, oh, good, and they're telling you about their experiences and in Latin America or even in the United States, some of them, and it's a really great dialogue. I tell Shin this story all the time. We have a mutual friend that was a journalist. Her name is Mijo, and she's living in Mexico City. She got married and she lives in Mexico City. And I remember when I first met her, English wasn't very, she couldn't really speak English, and her Spanish wasn't, she was trying to learn Spanish and it wasn't very good either. So even though she had a lot to say, she just couldn't get it out. And then when she moved to Mexico, she became fluent in Spanish. So I saw her about a year ago, and it was like meeting this whole new person, like the intelligent person I knew just came out because it was the only thing that inhibited was her language. And the thing is that, her thing, I remember her telling me this. I asked her if she missed Japan, and she said, I miss the food, I miss my family, but that's it. Because she's like, my heart, my soul is here in Mexico. And I feel like that's a lot of people who grow up if they're Japanese and they grow up in these areas, that their heart and soul is there. And so even if they come back to Japan, they still have that with them.
Yeah, I want to say something about the cross-cultural influences. Here in Boyle Heights, there still is a large, not as much as it used to be, a large Japanese American community. Yeah. And the Japanese, for some reason, well, because, the culture around you kind of reflect it and you become part of it. In the 40s, there were Japanese American pachucos, for real. In the late 40s, early 40s. So this symbiotic back and forth of trading off cultural backgrounds, it goes back in our community back to the 40s, and maybe even before. So the Mexican American community, the Japanese American community have always been very close in Los Angeles. And maybe the working class background, we live next to each other. You know, there were stories that a lot of when the incarceration happened in the early 40s for the Japanese Americans when they were incarcerated, a lot of families in Boyle Heights kept the belongings of these people that were sent to prisons till they came back. So there's always been this beautiful relationship between the Japanese Americans and the Mexican Americans. I think it's great.
Hi. Since this is basically an experience of cultural exchange, I wonder from the other end, what of Japan and Japanese cultures and arts have influenced you or stayed with you as you've continued to be artists and musicians? I'm curious from that end.
Well, I want to say personally, I want to say about the hospitality that they demonstrated to us, and just the manner in which they show their gratitude, and that was very very beautiful aspect of it that stayed with me personally, and in terms of influencing. Personally, I've always loved the Japanese traditional woodcuts, and also I'm a fan of language, and I know Spanish and Japanese, we have the same syllables. So in my previous album, I was inspired to do some verses in Japanese, and our friend who's actually, she's Japanese, but she speaks fluent Spanish, like Mexican Spanish, and so she helped me translate, and then with the pronunciation. So little things like that, I feel like they influence the whole artistic process, and I like the aesthetic also, and just the way in which the demeanor of everybody. I feel like when I was there, I felt like America can learn so much from their manners and just details. They're so detailed. So I thought that was something that made an impact. Of course, yes, definitely. That was another another thing. I like the phonetics and the pronunciation, and yeah, definitely that had a lot to do.
For me, in a little bit of, well, a lot of the meaning came through a previous experience, which was growing up in a social movement at a time where there was a lot of interconnectedness between communities, particularly Japanese American communities, and Chicano communities here in LA, among other communities, but especially the JA folks were really instrumental in sort of providing examples and context for how you fight and how you struggle, you know. And Alan is here today, and you know, other folks I'm sure in the audience, I can't see other faces that I recognize, but from that time. But you know, and then Maceo is here today too. Stand up, Maceo, or raise your hand at least. Yeah. And you know, Maceo's a Chicano that went out to Japan when he was 13 years old and became part of a professional taiko group. You know, and then was one of the founding members of Quetzal, and the taiko the drum was a big part of the beginnings of the band. And then now we have this amazing project with Nobuko Miyamoto and the folks that sort of surround the Obon circuit, and we've been able to really sort of build these bridges across communities again that have been fractured over the decades, and try to really start these conversations up again and really dig into each other's history and create a potential future together.
I just want to add one thing that I got, and maybe some of these other musicians have, is the confidence they gave me to keep doing music. Because if you're a local band, and anybody who's a local musician would know, it's like sometimes you feel like you're a part of the furniture playing in the club, you know, day in, day out, and they're just like, oh, these guys are playing again, whatever. And then you go to Japan, and people know your lyrics, they know all these things about you, what your music represents, and they really detail it, and it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like, well, there's a purpose to all this, you know. It isn't just like you just go, you play in the club, you go home or whatever. It's just like there's exchange of culture, and that carried me a lot, you know. Shin helped me put out about 5 albums out in Japan with 2 different groups, and each time I'm so grateful for him, and I'm so grateful that that's the part of the thing that keeps me going, and I'm sure the other musicians can attest to that.
Yeah, what I've seemed to learn and take away from Japanese culture, Japanese American culture, is loyalty. Super loyal, man. And their meetings run so well. their meetings are you're so organized. It's unbelievable. I mean, we can learn a lot from that.
There was a stereotype earlier.
And so yeah, what else? Yeah, loyalty, friendship, organization, commitment to struggle, social issues. Man, that's really inspiring. And the way they're approached, you know, very methodical. I went to the Day of Remembrance over here last week, and it's just so overwhelming. To recover after the war, after World War II, and to have this beautiful neighborhood and these spaces, it's very inspiring. It's very inspiring. So it's an honor to be able to be part of the community and to work in it. I work with Quetzal, with Fandango Bone, and Nobuko Miyamoto over the years. And so yeah, it's a very inspiring culture for me.
Well, I just want to add a further corollary to your comments on the Pachuco. The influence went well beyond the West Coast. We lived in Brooklyn, and this is in the early 40s and part of the World War II. My brother was a zoot suitor. He had those peg pants, the long jacket, the chain, the duck's ass hairdo, the whole picture. It was such a powerful force for that generation, as for some in that, some were very hostile, but certainly he was not.
So I wanted to address the film, actually, Akira. You've been shooting everybody for years and years. So if you can talk about first meeting Shin, how did you all meet? How did this community kind of bubble up, and what inspired you to pick up the camera? Did you think that you were going to make a film about this somewhere down the line, or you're just shooting performance? If you could talk about that kind of organic process.
Sure. So I realized the other day that this film has taken me longer to make than any other project that I've ever made, because I started shooting 18 years ago. So I remember back in 2000, I don't remember very many phone calls, but this one I remembered. Quetzal called me and he said, "Yo, there's this guy I want you to meet. His name is Shin Miyata. He's here from Tokyo." And I said, okay. And so I went over to his place and we met. And at the time, Quetzal was introducing him to a bunch of different people that were basically part of the East Side music scene, music and art scene, right? So a lot of different bands and other artists. And I, at the time, and still am, was making music videos for Quetzal and some of the other bands, Blues Experiment, Billy's in the House, Asan Underground, Quinto Sol, and I was doing it with the guy that's sitting next to you, Francisco Hernandez, and Maria, a whole bunch of people. So anyhow, our videos gave Shin basically like a visual tool, you know, that he could share with people in Japan to actually show them, to go beyond just the music, you know, to show them what the subculture was like at the time. So so I was lucky enough to go on tour with with Quetzal to Japan in 2000, and that's where I shot the footage of these guys. And for some reason, I don't know, I trained my camera on Shin a few times. So like, I had put that footage away and I didn't take it out because at the time, if you can think back 17 years, there was no YouTube, right? I had no way of getting the footage out, and I didn't feel like it was enough to package as its own documentary. So they just the material just sat on tapes, right? Until I took them out basically last year and started reviewing all the footage, and I, discovered or rediscovered the interviews that I did with them on the streets, and the shots of Shin. So that added like so much to this particular project, And for several years now, I've had the idea of doing something about Shin because he's such a unique character, right? Like I don't know anybody else like him doing the work that he does. And we've kept in touch like over the years. Like every time that he would come to LA, we would meet up, or if I would go to Japan, he's actually put on screenings for me of some of my other films in Japan, which are the best screenings because they always end in drunken parties. So I have a lot of love for this guy, and obviously all these other folks do too. So that's kind of how it came about.
How much footage do you have? Sorry, how many hours of footage did you have, like, once you started to get to the editing process?
Many hours. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know exactly. But it took a long time to whittle it all down to what it is now. And, because of Shin's relationships with all these other artists, I went out and shot all the other interviews, and it was a great thing for me too because I really got to meet these guys and get to know them when I hadn't really had strong relationships with them before. But now I feel like it's been a great process for me personally too.
My question is, I think what's great up there in the screening, documenting kind of what the reaction of the Japanese youth is to Chicano culture. Now this goes way beyond cultural appropriation. It's not just assuming certain superficial characteristics. But can you talk a little bit about what are there particular strains among the Japanese? Why they're interested in Chicano culture? Like if there are particular things in the Japanese culture or history that would lead in that direction. And by the way, I remember coming across, I grew up in Northeast LA, and I come across family photos of people in Pendletons, and they're Japanese American, and the pompadours, and I go like, damn, his dad was really strict. I never knew that's how he grew up. You know what I mean? So anyway, thank you.
For the Japanese youth, always fashion and the car is always happening, and the fashion is kind of top priorities for the youth, as you know. And also we are very exposed about the information from the United States, especially Los Angeles, always through the magazine, through TVs, and also 90s through the gangster movies, So we got the idea how they Chicano fashions through the movies, through the magazines, through the media, which are very stereotypes. But also Japanese and then Chicanos or Mexicanos has a common things. We are very care about the detail. We care about the story behind it. So I think the people who wear like a choros in Japan, they not wear just fashion. They also want to know they already know some story behind it, like being like very against the mainstream. So even in Japan, if they wear like that, the regular people don't want to cross to them. Yeah, of course, yeah. So there are so many reasons, but through the music, why I'm trying to bring the Chicano music to Japanese, because, mostly we are one nation and one language, and then we don't know about, how powerful having two cultures, two language, or like means, you can go more wider world, and also you can express more. That kind of things is very important to bring to Japan from here, I feel. Yeah. I mean, this is not the answers to your question, but I'm sorry.
Anything else from anyone? Okay.
So I think we'll do our two final right over here.
I know it was a lot of work, but I was just wondering how all this kind of was put together, or the funds, because, to be able to exchange cultures probably, does involve plane fares and all this going back and forth.
There was funds.
Okay, so I was able to go to Japan last October. Part of it was funded by the exhibition that's up right now at the museum, Trans-Pacific Borderlands, right? With the intention of doing a short project on Shin Miyata. So that I was actually there shooting a couple different projects. Other than that, it was all shot in LA, except for the archival footage that I had from 2000, where I went with Quetzal. So that's, I mean, yeah, it was done relatively cheaply. We stayed at my wife's dad's house in Tokyo, so saving money everywhere.
I had a couple of comments, but beyond that, I wanted to know if you plan to roll the film out around the country, because I know people in San Antonio and San Francisco and Chicago. And the other thing about the historical connections between Chicanos or Mexicans and Mexican Americans and Japanese, and I thought it might be a good idea to remember that the Japanese culture has a beautiful and powerful connection to earth and growing things, gardens and flowers, and who did a lot of the agricultural work here. That's a connection. I don't know if you remember, but Alberto Fujimori, the president of Peru, his whole campaign was based on working class. His campaign commercials showed him on a tractor on a farm, and so that's maybe another reason that we have we share some passion about, or we're rooted in earth and the poetry of earth. But if you would love to tell us where the movie's going, so we can tell our friends.
Okay, so we only have 2 screenings set up so far. The next one's in Mexico City next week, and then we're going to screen it in Tokyo. Oh yeah, in Jalapa, the week after that. Other than that, if you want to screen this film anywhere, if any of you know of any venues that would like to show it, please talk to me, because again, this was the premiere. So, this is hopefully just the beginning of sharing it with people. Thanks again for coming.